Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I am your host, Heather Shea. Today's episode is about promoting resiliency amid campus crises and conflict. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope you find these conversations make a contribution to the field and are restorative to the profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, and you can find our growing archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Today's episode was sponsored by Stylus Publishing. Stylus is proud to be a sponsor for the Student Affairs Now podcast. Browse their student affairs, diversity, and professional development titles at styluspub.com. Use the promo code SANOW for 30% off all books plus free shipping. And you can find Stylus on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at StylusPub. As I mentioned, I am your host, Heather Shea. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm broadcasting today from East Lansing, Michigan, near the campus of Michigan State University. MSU occupies the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. This episode features a conversation I recorded on Thursday, January 14th for the professional development seminar that I teach in the Student Affairs Administration Master's program at Michigan State University. Students in the class were invited to submit questions for our two guests, Dr. Kathy Adams Riester and Dr. Glenn DeGuzman, and I organized those questions around three themes: resiliency, campus crisis, and conflict. The conversation was recorded so that students who couldn't attend the live Zoom session could tune in later and watch it at their leisure. And after it was over, I was like, this would be a great podcast episode. And so, with everyone's permission, I'm bringing this conversation to Student Affairs Now because I believe this conversation, filled with wisdom and practical tips, will resonate with graduate students, student affairs educators, and frankly, anyone who is managing conflict and crises on campus right now, or dealing with a global pandemic, which is pretty much all of us. So here's today's conversation.
Thank you, Glenn and Kathy, so much for being here today. I really am appreciative of both of you. I've known both of you for over 2 decades. And so it's kind of unbelievable that we all are where we are now, but it's fun to be able to be back in this space. And as I was thinking about this topic today, I was like, I need people who are on the ground, in the weeds, leadership, administrative leadership positions, and who have had some significant time and experience in those roles. So I instantly thought of you two because both have ranges of experiences. And so you'll hear a little bit about that background here in a moment. But as you know, our topic today is around resiliency, campus crisis, and conflict. I posed that as the topic well before all of the uprising and insurrection was happening just last week. So, but this topic is obviously extremely appropriate today, and probably maybe more than ever. But of course, we've been living in kind of a state of perpetual crisis, maybe for decades, in fact. And so I thought we would begin today by just each of you giving a brief version of your student affairs journey. Where did you go to graduate school? Where did you work post-grad? Kind of functional areas in which you focused your career. And then as you respond to the questions, you can go into kind of more tangible examples related to your current experience. So Glenn, how about we start with you, and then we'll go to Kathy for the first question.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Glenn DeGuzman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm going to cameras this way. You all on my right. Glenn DeGuzman, he, him pronouns. I'm the Associate Dean of Students at UC Berkeley. I'm also concurrently the Director of Residential Life. Let's see. My professional journey, I did my undergraduate at University of California, Santa Barbara, Go Gauchos. I did my master's program at Colorado State University, Go Rams. And then I did my doctorate at the University of Laverne in Southern California, Go Leopards. And so really, I've been in the field for about 26 years. I stopped counting. So around-ish that amount. I've worked at 4 different institutions, from community colleges to 4-year institutions, for all private, all public, except for Laverne, which is a private. Let's see, 25 years. Most of my career, actually last year, I passed a mark where I've worked at one institution longer than all the other combined. So now I've been at UC Berkeley now for a very long time. My functional areas really started in res life way back. Actually, I would say multicultural affairs. I did work in an advocacy office, and then I went to residential life. And I've been in conference services, student activities, leadership development, conduct offices. I've really taken this, I don't know if this is a term y'all still use, but a generalist approach. And I've just really just kind of worked my way up through the field and found myself in my current position at UC Berkeley, where, which I enjoy. I enjoy being at Berkeley. That's my journey.
And Glenn and I crossed paths at Colorado State. I was a first year in the SAHI program, and Glenn was a second year. And we recently reconnected because we're part of the group of people who are now hosting Student Affairs Now, the podcast. So Glenn and I now get to see each other every single week. And Kathy and I go back to my time when I started working at the University of Arizona in 2001. And Kathy, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. As Heather said, my name is Kathy Adams Riester, and I am the Associate Vice Provost for Student Affairs and Executive Associate Dean of Students at Indiana University in Bloomington. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. So I did kind of similar to Glenn. I feel like I've had a very generalist path. I started out in residence life, probably similar to a lot of you, as an RA. I was at the University of Arizona as an undergraduate, Gold Wildcats, and I'm born and raised in Arizona, so I have an affinity for Southern California in particular, especially San Diego. So it was exciting to hear some West Coast people out here in Indiana. During my undergrad, I was an RA, and then I actually was a hall director, an undergrad hall director when they were really grad positions at Arizona. And then went from there to Indiana University to do my master's degree in what was then their College Student Personnel Administration program. Now, today it's called HESA, their Higher Education Student Affairs program. And so I did my undergrad there. And then I worked for 1 year at Northern Arizona University. After that, back in housing, but I had worked with Greek students when I was at IU as part of my practicum, and discovered I really liked that. So my goal was to be doing some work in Greek life. So at Northern Arizona, as I said, I was there for a year, but I did some work with the Greek community there, just kind of as a postgraduate practicum, and then took a position back at the University of Arizona back in Tucson. And I was at the University of Arizona for 23 years, post-master's degree, which is quite a long time to be at one institution. And I never thought I would be there that long, but I kept having really great opportunities to do new and different things. So while I started out as a hall director, I then went on to have an interim position working advising the Panhellenic Association and the fraternity and sorority office there, which turned into a permanent position. And in that office, I was able to work with Greek life, student activities, some of the leadership program development, the HR practices and procedures for the whole student union as part of that. So I really advanced a lot of my career in skill building at that time. That's also where Heather and I got to be good friends as part of that. And in that time, I eventually was the assistant director of the office. And when the director left, I applied for the job. I did not get it. And as part of that, I, was hopeful and thoughtful that maybe this, that I had something to learn from the new person that was coming in. And I stayed about a year and decided it just wasn't a good fit for me anymore at that point in time. And I had an opportunity to go back into residence life as an area coordinator. So I did that, and I did that for a few years. And then my ultimate goal was the Dean of Students office. And there was an opportunity to move into the Dean of Students office working with parent and family programs. And it was funny at the time. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't want to work with parents. All they do is yell at you about things, which was really my experience from Greek life and residence life. And Keith Humphrey, who's one of our ACPA presidents, was my the person at the time I would be working with. And he said, in this role, you really get to be the good person about this, because you're helping the parents who like either are coming to you first for a problem or last for a problem. And you really get to do good work with them. And for the most part, that was true. So I loved the job working with parent-family programs. I was also able to grow my role in the Dean of Students Office, working with Greek programs, again, which I had done in the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership, and then also working with like conduct boards, hearing boards, doing some code hearing cases, all that kind of stuff. And then I got my doctorate along the way. I have an EDD from Northern Arizona University, so go Lumberjacks from there. And then while I was finishing up, I was in my dissertation semester, my last semester dissertation, I actually took a new position at Indiana University in the role that I'm in now. I'm excited. I oversee all of our student services areas. So a lot of areas that I've worked with in the past, I feel like have kind of come together with some new ones. So it's a great opportunity.
Awesome. So good to have you both here. And I love the pathway. Hearing those stories is so fun, especially the parts where our lives kind of intersected. So as we talked about, the topic today is around resiliency. And so I wanted to start with that. I had two students kind of ask really great questions about resiliency. They are asked, what makes a university resilient? And is it more about actions of administrators, or is it more about student actions? But then Ernesto asked, do you all think that the term resiliency is overused? He talked about from experiences that he has had throughout undergrad, when the administration used the word resiliency after every single incident, it seemed like it had been overused. So is there a way to encourage students to have a better outlook without using that word resilience? So Kathy, do you want to start and then pass it to Glenn? Just generally, what is resiliency and how do you see it in your role on your campus?
Yeah, thanks. So I think Nader's question was really interesting, because I guess I think when I think of resiliency in that term, I think it really first comes from individuals, because to me, it means that you have individuals who face challenges and develop skills that help them overcome those challenges. And then that helps them as they face the next challenge. So it's kind of a skill set that you build, how to overcome those things that are problematic. So while an institution maybe could have that, I think we really try and help people develop those skills. And some students come with them because their path to getting to college has been more challenging. And I think then they're better able to deal with those challenges as they come up in college. It doesn't mean they deal with them perfectly, but they have some skills to rely on. And some students have had a really easy path and they may not have built up those skills as well. So I think part of our goal is to do that. And I do think maybe it's overused, although I have to say during COVID, like resiliency is so important. So I think, if there's any time to talk about it, it's probably now, because, getting through, day-to-day activities sometimes takes having some of those skills.
No, great point. Let me see if I can kind of cover other aspects as well. I think is one of the questions I'm looking at here is resiliency overused by institution? I think yes, but I'd also point out that as a student affairs professional, what we do, you got to get used to repetition. So when we hear something for the 100th time, the students may be hearing it for the first or second time. And then I think the other part of the question that I picked up on, I'm looking at the question right now, is what can we encourage? I believe, what can we encourage to help? I think there's a couple things. One is that we need to have and continue, and really, and honestly, the best solution is conversation. It's really getting to understand what the student experience are. When we talk about resiliency, we're really talking about, and I think it's, let me actually step back and let me make sure we're on the same page and how I define and understand resiliency. I think when I think about resiliency, I think about like us as student affairs professionals first. I think about what burns us out. We already are professionals who care. So we already are utilizing a lot of emotional labor. We're already experiencing a lot of secondary trauma because we care and we're empathetic and we really want to help students discover and really pinpoint the stressors that they're experiencing. And that's, you understand that through these conversations, right? And when we're all chronically stressed, and we are, and when students are chronically stressed, it's harder to be resilient. So through conversation, you're really trying to identify those one or two things, and you're really trying to connect them through resources. And I think what happens on both sides, because and my brain's stuck, because from a student perspective, we just need to help them with that one issue to help them just kind of, to kind of continue to move forward and really find that solution, or at least find a little bit more balance, or trying to overcome like the low points. I think the hard thing is for student affairs professionals, because we may be hearing that one student, but you might be thinking that's like the 10th time a student has experienced this. So we're all of a sudden experiencing this idea of secondary trauma. This is what makes resiliency so hard. We're constantly doing this over and over and again. And so I think that it does leads to this idea, the university talks about resiliency all the time. Yeah, and I think that's what makes the frontline staff particularly a burnout position.
Yeah, I'm really struck. I mentioned this to Glenn earlier today. There's an article in the Chronicle today called Team No Sleep. I'll stick it in our D2L chat. The pandemic has piled new demands on student affairs staffers. They're burning out and see no end in sight. So I do want to kind of turn towards the pandemic a little bit. Like, how has managing all the complications and dimensions of COVID on your respective campuses challenged your sense of resiliency? And I think Katie's point specifically, I think, is really good, because we're also really disconnected, right? Like, I know we're all, dialing into this today, not from a shared space or a shared classroom where we normally have class, but from our own respective locations. And in some ways it makes it really awesome, because we have this ability to have guest speakers from all over the country. But how do we promote resiliency in an environment that feels so disconnected right now during COVID? Glenn, do you want to start with that?
How do I promote resiliency? I look at it on multiple levels. From a staff perspective, I think that when I'm working with my teams, or when I'm working with my teams are working with the students, so like resident directors, coordinators, and whatnot, I think the first thing is making sure that they have a clear understanding of what we're expecting from them, and really making sure that we're paying attention to their workload. And we need them to separate work from your own personal space, meaning that when you are not at work, helping them find spaces, helping them find and talk about things that they're going to do to find relief from the chaos that literally is happening at work, in their personal lives, what's happening in our nation. There's just so much coming in that it's very difficult sometimes for even professionals to, someone like me, like, how do I find balance, and how do I find wellness for myself, right? That I have to also establish resiliency. So that's from a staff perspective. So it's messy. Each staff is very different. And as a supervisor, you have to have those conversations with each and every single one of them, and you need to just check in more than before. From an administration perspective, the best way to promote resiliency, in my opinion, is be real and constantly communicate and be concise with your communication. So in California, public health guidance changes periodically. We've had to evolve our internal policies, how we do testing compliance, how we've screwed up. So we've had to go back and recommunicate and explain. But I think as leaders, the way we promote it is you have to just be timely with information. I think there's a struggle sometimes about, like, let's get our information right before we communicate it. And every time we delay, that just creates more anxiety on staff, because they're trying to do their jobs. So we want to make sure that we get information up front quickly, and then ask for grace when we screw up, or we're saying, like, there's been a shift, and then again, going back to that personal level. Hey, what do we need? I know that's a tough situation. We had to pivot. We had to make a change. How can we support you? And we've had to do different things, like RAs didn't have to do, like our residents didn't have to do move out check-in. We had professional staff volunteers coming in just to alleviate some of that pressure. So you're constantly in the situational leadership mode.
That really resonates with me. Kathy, what about you? How's COVID challenged your sense of resiliency?
So I think it has been incredibly challenging. And I think there are a couple factors there. One, I think in higher education, with crisis management, I mean, a lot of institutions are really good about planning for crisis, but I don't think any of us anticipated how long this crisis would be. And it was a new crisis. So while we've had other types of emergencies or crisis situations, we haven't had a pandemic that has hit this length in depth. I mean, it's a worldwide issue. It's not just a campus issue. And so I think those two factors have made it incredibly challenging to deal with this type of crisis and to maintain any type of resiliency as part of that. So I think some of the things I try to focus on, I definitely echo Glenn's comments on communication, because I think one of the things that stresses staff out and students and parents and other constituents is when you don't know information. And COVID has had such rapidly changing information. So I think that we went with, we added some new meetings to our calendar. So I have it was happening daily in the fall, but now it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like a senior leadership team check-in, because we were having like daily emergencies where we would need to schedule meetings to talk about stuff, and it just was impossible. So we just set them up, for every day of the week for the fall. We also went to having deans and directors, so to communicate out through our larger group every other week. And then I did a direct reports meeting that I added to have on those in between weeks, so that I was making sure, like, if there was stuff that happened that week, like my larger group was also hearing about it. So part of it was adding some meetings for communication and communicating what we could via email. But a lot of the COVID questions also came with, we would say something, but then there was also lots of follow-up questions. So we tried to really hit that and help with the communication aspect. The other thing that I thought that I think is really important is talking with my staff about self-care. So I supervise like associate deans and directors as part of my role. And so for me to talk with them about what does it mean to take care of yourself and mindfulness, and do some activities with them that they could turn around and I could give to them and they could do with their staffs, to really talk about that. And part of it is, I think we get so busy trying to help other people and solve issues that then we don't take care of ourselves. So part of my role, I feel like as a supervisor, is to help give them some tools, not only for themselves, but then something that they can go and share with their staffs to be able to kind of check in on how they're doing. Because I know they're incredibly stressed. I mean, I hear that really frequently, and I can see it on their faces too, on how much they have going on. So I think part of that, and then try myself to say, here's things I'm working on. And I also do think that being vulnerable about it. So when I'm having a rough day, being able to share that with them, that I've had a rough day, because everyone is having them right now, so being authentic in that and being able to say, well, your directors and the people above you are also being challenged by this, whether it's something that happened at work with a decision or something you're having to do, or it's a personal issue in your family. I mean, everyone's having challenges right now. And so part of it is, how do we support each other to get through them?
Can I add really something quickly to that? Because
Yeah.
Kathy brought up something really powerful when we're talking about the tools that we provide. I think it's also really important to continuously adapt. Like we talk about, and in our field, we talk about feedback loops all the time, right? And usually we try to do it like over a period of a year. We're trying to be more quickly. We're trying to do this more quickly and just taking risks and trying to do something different. Like, for example, after the fall semester, we realized that we said, okay, our RAs, we're going to continue to do our bear chats, where these one-on-one communications. We normally require at least one, but now we're like, okay, let's try to do 3. And then an interesting thing we learned at the end, we're like, you know what? Sometimes students don't connect with the RAs, or they don't connect with others. So how do we come up with something different? So we decided to survey all incoming students for this upcoming spring to say, hey, when the going gets tough and when things are going bad, who do you check in with? And we just collect information. So when the RAs go and talk and they're finding they're able to bridge or connect, they can say, hey, have you checked in with X or Y or Z? Like giving them a different way to find an outlet. So you just got to constantly be nimble, and you got to constantly just keep an eye on some new innovative ways to talk to students, more than anything, just to connect, because they're in isolation anyways. They're all by themselves.
Yeah, I have really thought about that a lot in terms of checking in and knowing that that kind of check-in is so important, because again, back to that kind of feeling really disconnected. Um, Kathy, you made a comment about the fact that this is a crisis, right? And this is a crisis that's lasted for a really long time, and that we do a decent job of planning for other types of campus crisis. And I remember sitting at tabletop exercises around active shooters on campus, or other types of emergencies. And this type of crisis has challenged us in different ways. Certainly, what happened at the Capitol last week is also challenging our campuses in kind of an existential way, and in a very real way if you're in a Capitol. And then also the twin pandemic of racism on our campuses, I think, is the other piece that has certainly becoming a rising crisis as we seek to address DEI issues broadly. So I want to switch to talking a little bit about campus crisis, beyond the pandemic as well. But Kathy was one of the founding chairs of the ACPA Commission for Campus Safety and Emergency Preparedness. And so she's worked really closely. In fact, one of the authors of one of the chapters that we're reading for this week, Mahogany Shah, was, I think, a colleague or was on that board with you at some point, Kathy. So when you think about campus crisis, and we had several great questions that related to this. So Kirsten asked, during a crisis, what are your priorities? How do you decide upon a course of action? May asked about information flow. So back to that kind of communication piece. What is the big announcement and development takes place? Like, how do you respond quickly? And then Elizabeth asked specifically, like, how has crisis management and emergency preparedness changed on your campus as a result of the pandemic? And I guess I would add to that, like, and in what ways will it be permanently changed, right? Like, have we created, I know on our campus, we have these COVID look ahead planning teams, or LAPTs, that we're meeting regularly to both manage and then create operational plans around what the future is going to hold. So I think going forward, that mode of operation will be pretty common. So Kathy, I'll turn to you first and then go to Glenn. Talk to us about campus crisis and what are some of the priorities? How do you deal with information? And then in general, what do you see for the future of campus safety?
So I think that those are a lot of questions in one.
I know.
So I may not hit all of them. So I think during a campus crisis, I'm going to speak kind of in general. So I've been at 2 institutions and been pretty involved in the crisis planning. I think some of the things that have been developed that are helpful during COVID, or that might be new, is really some of the teams that Heather was talking about, bringing together. Setting up teams with institutional knowledge to address the type of crisis that you're having has been really important. So we have Indiana has like a restart committee. We have a campus unit kind of response team that I'm on that meets regularly to talk about kind of where we are with issues, isolation, quarantine, outbreak numbers, Greek housing and exposure there. So there's a lot of different metrics and committees that have been set up as part of that, which I think have really helped. And I think one of the things that was most important in that is some thoughtfulness of the campus leaders, so like the provost and the president, looking at the institutional resources to pull those committees together. So we have like infectious disease specialists, we have public health specialists. We're lucky to have a medical center that brings in some of those specialties. So I think that the forming of those teams was pretty important, and I think that is one of the things that I would hope that would be retained in the future. So depending on the type of crisis, looking at your campus experts and your community experts if you need them. So I never thought I would be on the phone regularly with our health department, talking with them about how do we address COVID in communal living situations for fraternities and sororities. And literally I've been on multiple health board calls, talk with them about what, kind of what we're seeing on campus with policies, and working with the health department on formulating policies around that type of housing. So I think the relationships with your local community experts are also super important as part of that. Prioritization, I think it depends on the type of crisis. And where you are, role in the institution. So a lot of times your priorities can be handed to you because the president needs this or the provost needs that, or your boss, like my boss, the vice provost needs this thing that he's been asked for. So depending on the type of crisis, it really depends on what you need to do and put together. I mean, there's some basic safety and kind of follow up and support that come into it. But it really differs depending on the type of incident that you have. And if you go into an incident command model where you have multiple supporting areas, it's really nice, because then you have like people with communication helping, people with operations helping with whatever operations you need. You have the student affairs people that often respond on the support side for students. So it kind of makes a nice way to divide up some of the heavy lifting in the work, and so that multiple priorities can get addressed at different times as part of that. And I've only worked at large public institutions, so I can't really speak to how a smaller institution would handle all of this as part of it.
I worked at a community college with about 10,000 students, and there wasn't a very robust incident response protocol. If something happened, you escalate it up, and then it's all hands on deck, and you try to figure it out from that perspective. At UC Berkeley, I think what Kathy provided was very similar. I mean, there's just so many things that I could resonate. It is, I think that crisis response over the years has become, or maybe it's because I just climbed higher in the position, but it's extremely robust. It's extremely complicated. And the best way for me to talk about it for this audience would be what happens at higher levels and what happens on the ground. Obviously on the ground, what happens if a situation occurs, the first thing that I always care about more is the safety of the person who's escalating, because usually in housing, for example, I'm working with a lot of younger professional staff. We provide them with the training. We give them scripts. We give them they got their to-dos, but when something happens at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m, which at UC Berkeley seems to be very common. I mean, like just in the past year, we've had a fire, a flood, a pandemic, death of students, death of staff. We've had, and it's just constantly responding. And then obviously everything associated with our political climate. There's just a lot of stuff happening. So you want to check in with the person escalating, because their heart's racing. I would want to find out about, we make sure they understand, to make sure they're asking about the student. Have they contacted folks? We just want to make sure that they're following the protocol to help them just alleviate some of the pressure, the feeling like they have to be the only person responding. There's more. Flow of communication, you all know that's going to happen. So that's going to be like afterwards. And obviously you want to debrief it later on. I think from a leadership perspective and from an administration perspective, I think one of the biggest things that I think about, or what we have to think about, is situations that I would describe as exceptional. And these are the big operational disruptions to the campus. And those are things like, will it attract media attention? Because I mean, at UC Berkeley, it always attracts media attention. Is there potential for risk, liability, litigation, right? Because one thing that always shocked me is how many lawsuits are pending at UC Berkeley against the university, ranging from just the student living the halls all the way to faculty. There's just lots of litigation. So the campus is really, we pay attention to that because we want to make sure that we're minimizing our risk and doing everything we can to minimize all those pieces. And then I think the other part is how many stakeholders are so involved, because oftentimes with crisis, a university isn't, at least at UC Berkeley, isn't in isolation. UC Berkeley, I work very closely with the city of Albany, the city of Berkeley. And so we're constantly in meetings to kind of figure out, like, if the earthquake hits, because I don't know what, UC Berkeley's built on a fault line, how do we support one another, and how do we make sure that we can share resources or get resources to each other if necessary? So these are some of the things that we think about. I think about, like, for example, this literally happened 2 nights ago. We had a situation where There was a high-speed chase. It ended up in our family graduate living quarters. I swear, it's like a movie. This car was hitting, like going through the streets. Person jumped out, running, had a gun pocket, gun discharged, shot himself, right? So imagine that happening. How does the university respond to that? You want to get the media under control. You want to make sure that the community is safe. You have to get messaging out to them immediately. You got to do all these things, and it involves like so many different folks on campus: media, police, your staff who are on scene. So it's a very disruptive, but it's a very complicated thing, which is why it's really important to make sure that you have standard operation procedures and people know their role in it.
And I would add to that a lot of campuses have some type of on-call system that can kind of loop in and get things caught up. So for example, we have a dean on call where the deans and directors at IU are on call. So if something happens in RPS that is a big issue that needs to be escalated, it's escalated there. Or if police come across something, they'll call the dean on call. And then it's kind of that my staff will then call me and say, okay, Kathy, I need to tell you this thing happened. And then I can loop in kind of the upper level people. So if we need to enact something like our upper level protocol and procedures, then we're able to do that. So the nice thing is that if there's some good systems in place, you're able to do that. And if there aren't, I mean, that's one of the things that campuses are working on to help build as part of it. I know as with our commission work, that's one of the things we talked a lot about of how do we help campuses who are starting down this road to build these processes and systems and the standard operating procedures that you need to address crisis, because something will happen as part of it.
That's awesome. I just want to add something to Kathy's point, because we, like, similar to us, we do have an administrative call. And going back to your question, Heather, about like innovative ways, just two things that we just recently pivoted on because of COVID. And this again talks about a university's willingness to adapt, or quite frankly, I'll just make the decision because it's in my scope, right? And I don't need to tell people above me. For example, the administrator on call, we have that as well, but we were burning out. I'm an administrator on call, right? And so we decided we have folks in our Dean of Students portfolio who are now learning how to be administrators on call. So we're alleviating some of that pressure. We can push more support downward to the frontline staff. Another way is communications. Like normally when there's a campus messaging that goes out, it's just sent out. We've involved, so our RDs, our resident directors, are literally getting communication while it's in draft mode, right when it's about to release to the students, and when it's released to students. What does that mean? More email. But what does it mean? You find out about information in advance. So when you're thinking, wait a second, my resident's going to ask me a question about this. How do you get the answer in advance? So you're not like caught off guard and like say, hey, student, I'll get back to you. And you know, that time will create more stress. So we have to constantly think about different ways. And leadership has to be willing to say, do I need to check in with anybody above me? No, just make the damn decision. And
Yep.
if you feel like it's for the right reason, and if you feel like, you know, if they're gonna slap me on the wrist later on, they're gonna slap me on the wrist later on. All I care about is making sure we get and do everything we possibly can to reduce the trauma on our staff.
Yeah. Indecision paralysis, right? Like it just like you can't move forward. I want to shift gears. I know we're running a little closer on time, but I want to shift gears really quickly to talking about conflict. Because I'm super interested in it. This goes way back to kind of some early conflict inventories, like how people manage conflict. And one of the assignments for this class is to have students take an inventory. The U.S. Peace Initiative has a conflict management inventory, and to talk about like how you manage conflict could indicate like how you might work within this field to try to resolve issues of difference. And so one of the kind of threads among many of the student questions had to do with supporting students with differing and conflicting ideologies. And that could be around First Amendment issues, free speech issues, balancing kind of opportunities for learning versus harm caused. And I know this could be a topic in and of itself because it's a really, really big topic to pivot to. But I wanted to link it a little bit because I do think we're gonna butt up against different people's crisis management styles too, and that in and of itself can cause conflict on top of. So what thoughts do you have about campus conflicts and how you operationalize some of those skill sets when you're dealing with your colleagues, when you're working with students, and when you're trying to address speech issues?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so conflict. So yeah, I was looking at all the questions, and there's questions at conflict at the high level, conflict at the ground level. So there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. Let me hit and talk about how conflict can look like at a high level for me, and maybe we'll just jump around, Kathy. I'm not exactly sure how to go about this one. This is a big question. I think organizational context is extremely important to pay attention to, because how conflict is managed at higher levels can really either alienate you as a professional, or you might like be proud of your institution, because some institutions like to bury things. And if you don't like things getting buried, you will not be happy. At UC Berkeley, something happened in the 60s, and that, something called the free speech movement. And so it's the first one, obviously, in the US on a college campus. And that drives how we lead. We have the value statements that we all work on, right? This is why we probably entered the field of student affairs. The principles of community, statements on how we are to behave, what is our foundation. We're talking about the documents at ACPA, NASPA. We all work and contribute to what it means to be in our field. But at UC Berkeley, free speech comes first. It's the number one thing. And we have to massage and talk about how we integrate our values into that. Our values will say something like, we're a just community, and discrimination and hate will not be tolerated, and we want to respect for our personal interactions, civility and respect for our personal interactions. That is there, but it cannot trump first free speech. And in most of the time it works, but then you get those situations where it's like oil and water, and speech can be interpreted and be very hurtful for our students, for our staff, for our faculty. It just cuts across everyone. I think the thing that makes this very hard is that the campus is always going to look at it from a risk and liability perspective, right? Because obviously violating the First Amendment, free speech, is a big deal. There's a lot of issues that they're concerned about. So what we have to do is, and we have to, as student affairs professionals, we play this very hard role of following with students, with communities who are impacted, and making sure that we can provide them some support to overcome some of those stressors. And as a student affairs professional, I always think, man, can't the university change it? And the university is not going to shift. They're not going to, at least UC Berkeley, they're not going to shift on free speech. We've had and culture come on campus, and you all know Berkeley, it's pretty progressive. We've had Milo, oh my gosh, Ben Shapiro. These are folks who show up. We are very, we build a lot of process to make sure that safety, security are there, but we will allow them to speak their mind and make sure they're safe. Do I value it on a personal level? No. But it's my professional obligation to make sure that they're getting that. And the amount of money that we have to spend on these type of things are quite expensive, but the campus will have to always hold that at its highest standard. I'll stop there. Save me, Kathy.
Yeah. And I think Glenn said a lot of kind of really great things that I agree with. And I think as public institutions, that's one of our challenges, is that free speech is very highly held. Things that traditionally happen around speech, and IU also prides itself on free speech. We don't have quite the long, as detailed of a history as Berkeley, but it's there. So I think that's the big challenge. And I think someone said in their questions, students need opportunities to experience and process moments of dissonance. And I think free speech is a great place for that to happen. I think the challenge is what happens when someone's speech is going against the values of the institution and what they might hold. And just because it doesn't mean they don't have the right to say it. So I find myself saying a lot of times and talking as we talk through conflicts of, well, you can say free speech, you can say what you want to say, but that doesn't mean words don't have consequences to them and that they don't have impact. So talking about what's that impact. I do think it will be interesting to see what happens. There are some higher education institutions where public institutions that have suspended, expelled students for some of what they're saying with speech. So up the road here, kind of our big kind of rivalry for IU is Purdue, and Mitch Daniels at Purdue removed a student for some social media content that he posted back in probably sometime in summer, July, August. So I think it's going to be interesting to see as things proceed what might happen. But I also think that I don't have any great answers for this, but our ability to bring people together to talk about these things and to realize that, you know, if you have a student who supports what's going on with the kind of insurrection rioting at the Capitol, they're still our student. And we can't kick them out because they believe that. So how do we kind of bring people together and really provide education and be, as we're supposed to be, the place to discuss these types of things. And so part of it is working with students on how do we have those type of discussions in a civil manner and hopefully take away some skills as part of that. But it's super challenging dealing, especially with that level of conflict.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the questions, and it really even speaks to like the next generation of student affairs leaders, like that's all of you, and thinking about how social media is a big part of your life in your world, and the things you say, you put your value, because that is a place where I put a lot more of my family values. I tend to try to stay away from work, but I know that's not the case for everyone. And I think about, like, this was very public. I don't know if you all are familiar with the situation with Jamie Riley, former colleague of mine who used to just put lots of information on Twitter about his values and whatnot. And as he climbed the field of student affairs, he kept moving up. He ended up at an institution whose values did not align, and students yanked his tweet, put it online, and he was no longer working at the university. So these are some of the consequences and things that you have to think about, because as a student affairs professional, you are being asked to be serving all students, right? Your job is, our professional job is to serve and help with the student experience, but it's all student experience, not just the ones who share your values with you. And I think then it becomes, I think for example, for me, where diversity, equity, inclusion was it's probably why I entered student affairs as a profession to begin with, because that's really how I entered the field. I was in 19, what was it? Goodness gracious, I'm going to age myself. When was I in college? 93, 95, early 90s, I don't know anymore. I was the student who was protesting. I was, pushing against Prop 209, 187. Those were that pissed me off. But when I became an administrator, I realized that there has to be a different way of engaging and creating change, but maintaining professional standards of expectations, right? This is, I think, what's hard for a lot of younger professionals, because now you have to also then learn skills of, if you possess, let's say, a good awareness, knowledge, good skill sets, competencies around, let's say, diversity, inclusion issues. I saw some questions on like, misgendering folks, right? How do you have a conversation with students who might not be at that same level of competency than you, without you being on a soapbox just preaching? Because if you're preaching, if like you all study student development, how do you not get them to just back away and go into defense mode? Have them stare at you blankly, nod their head like they agree with you, but then they're gonna fear you. They're not gonna listen to you, and you're a blip in their life. You're a short period of time where where eventually they're going to move on, go somewhere else, and you're never going to have that impact. So while you have that time with them, how do you create awareness for them and help them take baby steps? If they get it, that's the easiest student to work with. But if they don't get it, how do you get them to move forward one step at a time? Help create awareness first, give them a little bit of knowledge, let them make the decision to come to you to learn more. I do it by being very open about where I screwed up. here's my learning. Here's where I messed up. I find students who see me as more humanized, willing to ask me, so when you messed up on that, how did you overcome that? That is, I think, one of the things that, one of the skill sets that I encourage you to pick up, especially as you're managing conflicts, in your spaces.
Really, really well said. We're getting close to the end of time, but I wanted to put out there, those folks who are watching the recording, if you have questions, I've seen a couple things go into the chat. Just unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, everyone. And Kathy, thanks so much for all of your great insights today. One question I had for both of you, when we were talking about conflict, we were talking about how organizational context matters, and it can be alienating or it can make us proud. As someone that's about to start an intense job search for my first real, big girl student affairs job, one thing I'm wondering is, what kind of questions do you think that I can be asking in interviews to kind of gauge the approaches to conflict at an institution?
So I would say, so one, I think your research on that institution is hugely important. I will go on, look at the website. If they have a student newspaper or something of that sort, look at it. If they have some social media outlets now, looking at some of those to get a sense of what the issues might be, and then how they're being addressed by the administration. And especially if there's something concerning that you see there, I think saying, oh, I saw that this has been a big issue on campus. How do you think the institutional response is, or, being able to ask some thoughtful questions around that is important. And then also, I think being able to, especially with students and maybe with, depending on the level of colleagues you're talking to, being able to ask, what have been some of the biggest issues and challenges for the university, or, kind of getting around some of those bigger institutional questions. I think it's harder to tell sometimes, certainly if you would know someone at the institution, how, making a call just to check and see, what have some of those big things been as well. But then I think based on your research, putting in some thoughtful questions around that. And if you have some no-go issues for yourself, I think really doing some probing around that. So when I was coming out of grad school interviewing for my first job, I was a hall director, and I went to USD, which is a private Catholic institution in San Diego. And they were having a full-time hall director for the first time with a master's degree. And my big question is, how did they do education around sex education and pregnancy prevention and things like that? And so I kind of worked that into, am I going to be censored that I can't talk about this at all because it's of the institution? So working into those questions was important. The other thing is, they accidentally ran me into another candidate that they had there who was a nun, and out of the order of that school. So I knew probably right at that moment that this probably wasn't the right job, because I'm pretty liberal, and, I was like a Planned Parenthood sex educator, because I thought I wanted to be an obstetrician gynecologist. I am far from a nun. So I knew that might not be a good institutional fit for me. So I think that research and then asking questions that are super important to you on that are key.
But Glenn, if you have a thought to share.
Yeah, I love
yeah.
what Kathy said. I'm gonna and I agree with that. I think the thing is that I don't know if there's a question that you can ask in an interview where you're unless it's really subjective, unless that person's really willing to share honestly and genuinely the situation. So the way I would, I believe what Kathy said, you have to do your research, but here's how I would do the research. I would look at an institution and look at their track record over 5 years. What major changes have they made? Because we talk all the time, our field is evolving. So look at the institution, are they evolving? If you can't do it in 5 years, then you're at an institution that's gonna be very slow. Look at it at campus level, look at it at department level. You wanna know how I operate? Look at my decisions over the last 5 years. That'll tell you how innovative or how willing the leaders are in your department to make changes. The questions that I get the most from my staff are going to be tied to diversity, equity, inclusion, and professional development. So then you have to look at my decisions. How am I supporting that? How am I making decisions on that? That's how you judge that. You're not going to get it from an interview because I'm going to tell you what you want to hear because I want you to come and work for me. What you need to do is you need to ask other people, preferably associations, because I've been in this field for 25 years. You can call Heather and say, Heather, tell me more about Glenn, right? Because if you have a relationship with Heather, she'll tell you I'm crazy. I'm sure she will, but she'll also tell you this is what I value because I've been doing it since I've been a damn graduate student, right? So these are the type of things that you need to find out. And it's research that sometimes you have to look around, not necessarily asking the source itself, because you might not get a straight answer.
That's where the network is so critical and important. And it is a really small field. I think that's the one thing that I've learned over my career is that, like, I so appreciate everybody's time today. And Glenn and Kathy, it was so useful to have you all sharing your experiences. But thank you so much for your time. And thanks to all the students who joined in today. I was expecting it to just be Kathy and Glenn and I. So you all are awesome. Thanks for taking time.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity, Heather.
Good luck this semester.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
Kathy,
you.
nice meeting you.
Nice
Kathy,
meeting you too, Glenn.
I think I met you at one of the commissions for safety at a conference. That's probably where I saw you at.
That would make sense.
Oh yeah, that's probably where I saw you.
I love our small world.
I
It
know,
makes me
right?
it makes
I
me so
know.
happy. Thank you both so much. I really
welcome.
appreciate it. And
course.
have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thanks.
go.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. I am so grateful to Kathy and Glenn, as well as the students in EAD 893 for granting permission to promote this conversation today on Student Affairs Now. Thanks also to our sponsor, Stylus Publishing. You can receive reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to our Student Affairs Now newsletter, which is located on our website at studentaffairsnow.com, where you will also find our growing archives. Please subscribe, whether it's on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Invite others to subscribe, share on social, or leave a 5-star review. It really helps conversations like this one reach more folks and build a community so we can continue to make this free and accessible for everyone in the field. Again, I'm Heather Shea. Thanks to our fabulous guests and for everyone who is watching and listening. Make it a great week, everyone.